MK Ultra. Jared Lee Loughner, pictured here. If you don't know what MK Ultra is, read the third paragraph. You need to so that you understand conspiracy theorist context in referring to Loughner, the shooter in Arizona, as potential MK Ultra. Well, this is weird. Loughner's attorney, who defended Unab bomber Ted Kaczynski, also may have represented Tim McVeigh. Tim McVeigh, a lot of people don't know, was seeing the number 2 mind sciences doctor in the country ordered by the military from his years in Desert Storm. Some people, like Alex Jones, believe McVeigh was MK Ultra as well. It appears Loughner was seen dazed, confused, and smiling like a lunatic after the shooting. Very similar to programming side effects, but not evidence yet. One story online shows there is a second man they are seeking for arrest in the shooting. Someone who was with Loughner right before the shooting, who was meeting with him. They have video of this man from surveillance cameras nearby. I can't say this with confidence. It appears there is enough evidence to start the rumor mill over MK Ultra. I expect you will hear conspiracy theorists discussing this shooting for a while, especially if some kind of bill, law, or anti-terror act is passed quickly as a result of the trauma and tragedy. What is MK Ultra? MK Ultra was a code name declassified in the 1970s Church Committee and other lawsuits brought against the government, where the public was informed that thousands of people, patients from hospitals, mental health patients, prisoners in the justice system, and even public citizens were selected for testing without their consent. Testing was conducted in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Some claim they still go on today and provide evidence. The testing includes torture, drugs, and exotic hypnosis experiments in an effort to explore the mind, propaganda, and other related patterns. One sub-department of the operation included a group of lunatic scientists who were looking to create an assassins program to see if it was possible to kidnap someone, say an enemy in a country, conduct hypnosis and other techniques learned in MK Ultra, and send them back to the country with a plan to assassinate their leaders. That plan is what scares people most. MK Ultra was carried out by the CIA illegally, and in the 1970s, hundreds of patients sued the federal government for damages, and the government settled and paid millions of dollars. Now here is the really trippy, scary info. Some of these patients where MK Ultra was used include Ted Kaczynski, the Unab bomber, Mark David Chapman, the man who shot Lenin, Sirhan Sirhan, the man who shot Bobby Kennedy, and even Lee Harvey Oswald is rumored to have attended a base in Japan before heading to Russia, where MK Ultra experiments were taking place. David Ferrie, Oswald's boss for a long period of time, is said to have been an MK Ultra specialist and specialized in hypnosis and, believe it or not, sexual molestation to mess with his patients' heads. David Ferrie was a convicted child predator who left the Catholic Church to train black operations hitmen for the invasion of Cuba. David Ferrie taught the Louisiana Civil Air Patrol, where both Lee Harvey Oswald and Barry Seal joined as 15-year-old children. Barry Seal became the primary operative in Iran-Contra who ran drugs for the CIA and was an active contract hitman. Oswald was accused of killing John F. Kennedy. David Ferrie was murdered, made to look like a suicide, the night before his testimony in a trial Jim Garrison brought against the CIA, where he accused Ferrie and others of using Oswald as a patsy. I have tons more info on this subject matter for my film Convenient Deaths, History of Assassinations, Black Operations, and the CIA. George H.W. Bush was director of the CIA during the time many of the MK Ultra cases were brought against the government. He was a major oil tycoon and skull and bonesman who was active in CIA operations before that, and after his director position at the CIA was vice president of the CIA. H.W. Bush later became president after previously sitting as vice president during the Reagan years. Many people have pointed out George H.W. Bush's connections to the Kennedy assassination. During the years Bush Sr. was involved with CIA operations against Cuba, while he owned Zapata Oil. Lee Harvey Oswald even attended a social dinner with CIA operatives, where Bush Sr. was present years before the assassination, as pointed out in many books and research by investigators. One good book that will fill you in on all this is Family of Secrets. A film that came out a few years ago attempted to show the connections of Bush Sr. to Kennedy's assassination called JFK, to which you can view here. John Hinckley Jr. and President Reagan. In 1980, Hinckley Sr. was a Texas oil man who, the records show, strove mightily to get fellow Texas oil man George H.W. Bush the Republican nomination for president. The Bushes and the Hinckleys were frequent dinner companions. And almost bewildered John Chancellor on NBC Nightly News reported the bizarre coincidence that Vice President Bush's son, Neil, and Scott Hinckley had dinner plans for March 31, 1981, now cancelled, of course. But even Chancellor failed to mention the close friendship between the assassin's father and Vice President Bush, let alone the rest of the corporate media. Here is the NBC clip that I found in archives and shared with the internet a while ago. This same clip, along with countless others, were collected for my documentary film series, Core of Corruption, where you can see them at coreofcorruption.com or newworldrareport.com, and they were also given to Jason Bermas to appear in Invisible Empire. Reports indicate that the Bush family strove mightily to keep this information from the American people. And some reports list this incredible coincidence directly linked to the assassination attempt of President Reagan as one of the most spiked stories of the last century. In other words, the brother of the shooter and the son of the vice president and their wives had a dinner date for the day after the shooting. But it really wasn't such a bizarre coincidence. Those two families were very close, but the press never focused on that critical fact, as it should have. If Reagan had died, the oilmen's interests would have been served. The weirdest part about it was that Hinckley was able to make and receive phone calls from his hotel room, but chose to walk a great distance and wait by a public payphone where he waited for contacts every day, as though it was a part of a conspiracy with co-conspirators. A very good read on the Hinckley-Bush connections is a book that came out about 20 years ago, entitled The Afternoon of March 30th. It was published as a novel in order to protect the author. This book is now more relevant than ever, and it can be obtained at http://www.nathanielbloomberg.com/bush.htm. Neil Bush, a landman for Amoco Oil, told Denver reporters he had met Scott Hinckley at a surprise party at the Bush home January 23, 1981, 9 weeks before Hinckley's brother John Jr. attempted to assassinate President Reagan, which would have elevated Bush Sr. to the presidency, and approximately 3 weeks after the U.S. Department of Energy had begun what was termed a routine audit of the books of the Vanderbilt Energy Corporation, the Hinckley Oil Company. In an incredible coincidence, on the morning of March 30, the day of the Reagan assassination attempt by John Hinckley Jr., 3 representatives of the U.S. Department of Energy told Scott Hinckley, John Hinckley Jr.'s older brother and Vanderbilt's vice president of operations, that auditors had uncovered evidence of pricing violations on crude oil sold by the company from 1977 through 1980. The auditors announced that the federal government was considering a penalty of $2 million. This on the same day that his brother John, the youngest son of Vice President Bush's close friend, attempted the assassination. Scott Hinckley reportedly requested several hours to come up with an explanation of the serious overcharges. The meeting ended a little more than an hour before John Hinckley Jr. shot President Reagan. 2. Excerpts from an interview by Teresa Walla, United Press International, March 9, 1985. Journalism professor Nathaniel Bloomberg was so disturbed about the investigation into the attempted assassination of President Reagan that he turned his suspicions into a 377-page novel. In the afternoon of March 30th, Bloomberg blends fact and fiction in looking at the unreported connections between Hinckley's family and that of Vice President George Bush, the man who came within a heartbeat of the presidency of the United States. What time really after is the case to be officially reopened, said the Rhodes Scholar and former dean of the University of Montana Journalism School. If they can answer all the questions satisfactorily, I'll be delighted, he said in an interview. In truth, I don't think all the questions can be answered without opening up a whole new can of worms. Bloomberg's unease is now focused on the indifference shown to what he calls the story behind the story. Bush, he said, has questions to answer in connection with the attempt. So do the FBI and the judge who presided over Hinckley's trial, according to Bloomberg. I'm not saying there was a conspiracy to assassinate Reagan, Bloomberg emphasized. I'm saying there was a conspiracy to keep significant information from the public that it has a right to know. Bloomberg asks his readers to consider his contentions that journalists were fed a barely believable story full of inconsistencies. A longtime media critic, he decided the example warranted more than a critique of press performance in a crisis. Such efforts, he said, usually go out there and die. Instead, he chose to weave his questions into a novel so it would reach a broader audience and allow him to probe problems in society and corruption in government, as well as maladies of the U.S. press. Here are some of the videos of the testimony from MKUltra survivors during court cases against the government. MKUltra victim testimony C. MKUltra victim testimony B. MKUltra victim testimony A. The CIA's Project MKUltra, Secret Human Experimentation. In the 1950s to the 1970s, the CIA mind control project was aimed at finding a truth serum to use on communist spies. Test subjects were given LSD and other drugs, often without consent, and some were tortured. At least one man, civilian biochemist Frank Olson, who was working for the government, died as a result of the experiments. The project was finally exposed after investigations by the Rockefeller Commission. A short video about MKUltra from a documentary called Secrets of the CIA. 4. Operation Mockingbird. Also, in the 1950s to 70s, the CIA paid a number of well-known domestic and foreign journalists from big-name media outlets such as Time, The Washington Post, The New York Times, CBS, and others to publish CIA propaganda. The CIA also reportedly funded at least one movie, The Animated Animal Farm, based on the novel by George Orwell. The Church Committee finally exposed these activities in 1975. In 1953, Joseph Alsop, then one of America's leading syndicated columnists, went to the Philippines to cover an election. He did not go because he was asked to do so by his syndicate. He did not go because he was asked to do so by the newspapers that printed his column. He went at the request of the CIA. Alsop is one of more than 400 American journalists who in the past 25 years have secretly carried out assignments for the Central Intelligence Agency according to documents on file at CIA headquarters. Some of these journalist relationships with the agency were tacit, some were explicit. There was cooperation, accommodation, and overlap. Journalists provided a full range of clandestine services, from simple intelligence gathering to serving as go-betweens with spies in communist countries. Reporters shared their notebooks with the CIA. Editors shared their staffs. Some of the journalists were Pulitzer Prize winners, distinguished reporters who considered themselves ambassadors without portfolio for their country. Most were less exalted, foreign correspondents who found that their association with the agency helped their work, stringers and freelancers who were as interested in the doing-do of the spy business as in filing articles, and, the smallest category, full-time CIA employees masquerading as journalists abroad. In many instances, CIA documents show journalists were engaged to perform tasks for the CIA with the consent of the managements of America's leading news organizations. The history of the CIA's involvement with the American press continues to be shrouded by an official policy of obfuscation and deception for the following principal reasons. The use of journalists has been among the most productive means of intelligence gathering employed by the CIA. Although the agency has cut back sharply on the use of reporters since 1973, primarily as a result of pressure from the media, some journalists are still posted abroad. Further investigation into the matter, CIA officials say, would inevitably reveal a series of embarrassing relationships in the 1950s and 1960s with some of the most powerful organizations and individuals in American journalism. Among the executives who lent their cooperation to the agency were William Paley of the Columbia Broadcasting System, Henry Luce of Time Inc., Arthur Hayes Sulzberger of the New York Times, Barry Bingham Sr. of the Louisville Courier-Journal, and James Copley of the Copley News Services. Other organizations which cooperated with the CIA include the American Broadcasting Company, the National Broadcasting Company, the Associated Press, United Press International, Reuters, Hearst Newspapers, Scripps Howard, Newsweek Magazine, the Mutual Broadcasting System, the Miami Herald, and the Old Saturday Evening Post and New York Herald Tribune. By far the most valuable of these associations, according to CIA officials, have been with the New York Times, CBS, and Time Inc. Appropriately, the CIA uses the term reporting to describe much of what cooperating journalists did for the agency. We would ask them, will you do us a favor, said a senior CIA official. We understand you are going to be in Yugoslavia. Have they paved all the streets? Where did you see planes? Were there any signs of military presence? How many Soviets did you see? If you happen to meet a Soviet, get his name and spell it right. Can you set up a meeting for us? Or arrange a message. Many CIA officials regarded these helpful journalists as operatives. The journalists tended to see themselves as trusted friends of the agency, who performed occasional favors, usually without pay, in the national interest. Two of the agency's most valuable relationships in the 1960s, according to CIA officials, were with reporters who covered Latin America, Jerry O'Leary of the Washington Star and Hal Hendricks of Miami News, a Pulitzer Prize winner who became a high official of the International Telephone and Telegraph Corporation. Hendricks was extremely helpful to the agency in providing information about individuals in Miami's Cuban exile community. A note about Hendricks: he was the one who Seth Kantor, reporting on the JFK assassination, was told to call for background on Oswald after Oswald's arrest. Hendricks, from Miami, had all the info on Oswald's pro-Castro leafleting activities in New Orleans, details about Oswald's defection to the Soviet Union, etc. Only years later did Kantor realize the significance of a guy like Hendricks, CIA, having so much info on Oswald so soon after the assassination. The Central Intelligence Agency owns everyone of any significance in the major media. William Colby, former CIA director, quoted by Dave McGowan, derailing democracy. You could get a journalist cheaper than a good call girl, for a couple $100 a month. CIA operative, discussing the availability and prices of journalists willing to peddle CIA propaganda and cover stories. Catherine the Great, by Deborah Davis. There is quite an incredible spread of relationships. You don't need to manipulate Time magazine, for example, because there are Central Intelligence Agency people at the management level. William B. Bader, former CIA intelligence officer, briefing members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, the CIA, and the media, by Carl Bernstein. The agency's relationship with the New York Times was by far its most valuable among newspapers, according to CIA officials. It was General Times' policy to provide assistance to the CIA whenever possible. The CIA and the media, by Carl Bernstein. Senator William Proxmire has pegged the number of employees of the federal intelligence community at 148,000, though Proxmire's number is itself a conservative one. The intelligence community is officially defined as including only those organizations that are members of the U.S. Intelligence Board, USIB. A dozen other agencies, charged with both foreign and domestic intelligence chores, are not encompassed by the term. The number of intelligence workers employed by the federal government is not 148,000, but some undetermined multiple of that number. Jim Haugen, Spooks. For some time I have been disturbed by the way the CIA has been diverted from its original assignment. It has become an operational and at times a policy-making arm of the government. I never had any thought that when I set up the CIA that it would be injected into peacetime cloak and dagger operations. Former President Harry Truman, the 22nd of December, 1963, 1 month after the JFK assassination, op-ed section of the Washington Post, early edition.